Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the CEOs and co-founders with a company called Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. And we've been working with life science companies across the globe for the last 12 years, helping them virtualize everything from their advisory boards, medical education events, investigator meetings, patient focus groups, and even large corporate events. We've done everything in between. But really, most importantly, at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. So not only do we initiate those conversations through our Insight platform, but we sustain and build it, creating authentic partnerships and relationships, and help to solve some of these big sticky problems using a series of touch points over the time in our platform. We also like to encourage those kinds of conversations in this podcast. So we're really inspired by some of the provocateurs, the digital leaders, the thought leaders in the healthcare space, where we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm really excited to have one of these digital thought leaders. This is Julia Walsh. So happy to have her on the show. She's actually a global pharmaceutical marketing and healthcare communication specialist. She's based in Sydney, Australia. So she's also an aspiring infodemiologist. So we're going to find out a little bit about what the heck that means. And Julia's inherent curiosity drives her to understand emerging trends in data science. And she is a global pioneer in the application of search listening in the healthcare space. So Julia also offers expertise across strategic planning, brand development, doing things like market analytics, tactical planning, all sorts of management of seamless cross-channel implementations, including all things digital, as well as workshop design and moderation, as well as a ton of team leadership. She's the CEO of a fantastic company called Brand Medicine International and a partner at the Jasprisa Group. Welcome, Julia. So happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely. So let's get started a little bit on your professional journey. I oftentimes love having other women entrepreneurs on the show. A lot of people have had an interesting voyage in their career as they have been aspiring through the STEM area. We're just starting to see more and more women coming into that. But tell us a little bit about what inspired you. How did you get started? And how on earth did you end up founding a company called, the Brand Medicine International?
Great question. Well, I started out as a scientist. You mentioned my inherent curiosity, and so it was natural for me when I left school to study science. And when I graduated from university, I did a major in biochemistry. And it's probably why I love data so much as well. I actually got a phone call in response to a job application I had put in at the CSIRO, which is our premier research organization here in Australia. And I actually thought it was one of my friends pulling a prank on me, because I just thought there's no way that I would be so lucky to get a job in this amazing research organization. But it wasn't a joke. And I was able to get this opportunity to work there at the bench. And I did that for quite some time. I worked as a cell biologist and I worked as a molecular biologist. And what ended up happening was that I had to spend a lot of time by myself in the lab because of the nature of the work that I did. And I'm not really a solitary person. I'm more of a people person. And so when I kind of came to a crossroads to decide whether or not to take another contract, and this is one of the other things about science research, is you don't have the security of a long-term job. You have to go contract by contract as the funding comes up, and it's whether or not your particular area of research is, the flavor of the moment. So I discovered healthcare advertising. And I just thought, wow, I had never even heard of this area. And I thought, this is wonderful because it allows me to bring my scientific background into a creative realm. And that's one of the things that I love about the industry, is working with the creative people. And that's one thing that I would never go back to the bench, because I would absolutely really miss miss that left and right brain blend that we have within our teams and agencies. So that's how I ended up working in healthcare advertising. From there, I was lucky enough to pursue one of my dreams to work in New York. So working here in Sydney, a lot of the agencies are really small. So they were like 10 to 25 people. And I heard about these agencies in New York. I was working with Grey Healthcare, and Grey Healthcare in New York was just 350 people. And I couldn't imagine an agency that big and the kind of work that they would do. So I was really lucky to pursue that dream and have an opportunity to be transferred over to Medicus New York, actually within the Publicis network back in 2005. So that's kind of how my career transferred from being a scientist into healthcare advertising and then onto the global stage really, and having responsibility to lead global accounts, which I really enjoyed.
Beautiful. Good for you. And that's an outstanding pathway to getting in, and then also, you know, capturing a little bit of that sort of entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial skill set as well, which is always amazing. And so you've gone ahead and partnered with somebody in a group called Jaspersa Group. Tell us, how is that different or related to you and you founding Brand Medicine International? What is the two that do that's different or complementary to each other?
Well, the funny thing is that both companies have been born out of crisis. So the Jaspersa Group was founded when we were living in New York and the GFC hit. And this is one of the things that, it's actually full disclosure, it is my business that I have in partnership with my husband. And one of the things that I think, it's that whole necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing. So we both quit our jobs on the same day during the GFC. So we both had secure jobs and we both quit the same day. And we were like, what are we doing? But it's times like that where actually it's the best time to take a leap. And so we started the Jaspersa Group, and that has been an enormous sort of company that's partnered with organizations like KPMG, Citrin Cooperman, FTI Consulting, working to roll out training for, well, basically management consulting training across those organizations. We've trained thousands of people. And so my role in that is to bring across the training aspects into what I do as well. And so I do a lot of strategic facilitation, which you mentioned at the beginning there in the introduction. And that's one of the things that I've learned and developed as a skill through the work that I've done with Nick in the Jaspersa Group. So there's a bit of a blend where we can bring across the training, like presentation skills training, media training, negotiations, all of that into the healthcare advertising space. And the other thing is, coincidentally, Nick was introduced to me by a client many, many years ago. I worked with Johnson & Johnson Medical on the Future of Nursing campaign. You might have seen that back in the days, but it was a long time ago now, 15, 20 years ago. But they rolled that out, I believe, in Canada. It was definitely a really big campaign in the US. And the whole idea was to re-inspire people and attract them to the career of nursing, and to rebrand nursing as something where people had this perception that it was all about changing bedpans. Whereas they elevated the status of this really, really invaluable career path and repositioned it so that people understood what it actually was on a day-to-day, in the sense that it's really challenging and really rewarding. And where would we be without our nurses? So I was really lucky to work on the rollout of that campaign here in Australia, and working with the marketing director of Johnson & Johnson. And he would always talk about my best friend Nick, that he'd studied pharmacy with. And oh yeah, you would really get along with him. And then eventually he finally introduced us, and the rest is kind of history. But it's really nice to also for Nick to have that pharmacy background. And so that's where there's a lot of synergy in terms of the way that we can provide training to the pharmaceutical industry as well, because he has that understanding of you know, the active ingredients, the indication, the contraindication, the dynamics between all the different allied health care professionals and that kind of thing. So he can train in that space, but he also understands the context, which I think when you're working in pharma is really important.
Absolutely. And sounds like a wonderful story. I do want to linger a little bit on something very pivotal that you said. I think that has huge applications for where we are today in the kind of the post-pandemic period. A lot of people's lives have stopped or started or pivoted. So many people have been affected career-wise, you know, personally wise, all kinds of different things. This is called the era of the Great Dispersion, where people are fleeing cities and going to different places and rethinking their entire career. And here you and Rick, you know, prior to all of this happening, took the big leap and made that and made that big change. What advice would you give if you were speaking to people today who have to make those similar choices, and the things that they should watch for, or the awarenesses or those opportunities that you would encourage them to take?
Oh, it's such a good question, because I've been on the receiving end of this advice before in my career. And it actually was when I was leaving the CSIRO. I had a boyfriend who actually now works at ResMed. We're still good friends. And he had moved to do a PhD in Italy. And so this was before email was even a thing. And I would sit there and we would get on live and type to each other at night, and the little, you know, the white dot on the black screen would come up, and I'd be waiting for a response because the phone calls were too expensive. And anyway, so he was over there, and my contract was coming to an end, and I had an opportunity to either take a new contract or go to Italy and live in Florence for 6 months. And I remember my bosses at the time saying, we're not going to give you this contract because you need to go to Italy. And I'm like, it's going to ruin my career taking this break. And, you know, like I really was very concerned and conscientious about, I've got to always be taking linear steps towards building my career over time. Whereas they had the wisdom of reflecting back over their lives and going, you've just got to leap at these opportunities because you do only live once, you know? And so I did. And I spent the last probably 6 weeks of my time in Italy lying awake at night, worried about the fact that when I came back to Sydney, I had no job. And I guess the advice that I would give people reflecting back on that, because I got back and I got a job right away, but I spent 6 weeks in Italy worrying about it. And so I think what I realized through the GFC as well was, again, I was lying awake at night, grinding my teeth, so worried about, you know, how we were going to make ends meet. And we brainstormed all the time about, you know, how we were going to get ourselves out of this mess. And just like everybody else was, it all went down. I was sitting actually in the garden of Lehman Brothers the day that closed down, eating my lunch because it was near my office. And just suddenly all these people started pouring out of the building carrying their boxes. So, you know, everyone was in it together. But again, we landed on our feet. And I think that's the thing, is not to worry, because worrying is not productive. Like even right now, I guess I've finally learned that lesson. And in starting brand medicine and going, you know, through, of course, it's a COVID baby. And going through that process of starting up a company and walking the digital footpath, I guess, trying to connect with clients and starting from scratch in pharma as well. You have to get past procurement as a first step. So you have to be a verified vendor. So that, you know, just that in itself is a huge task. But I've left the worrying behind this time, because I have confidence that it will be okay. And I think, you know, life is just better when you're not spending every day stressing out.
Yeah, and I think if there's anything that most of us have taken away from this COVID-19 pandemic, is that you do have to throw the anxiety on the wayside, or it would literally drive you into, you know, levels of unwellness. So yeah. I'm sure that there's going to be many interesting clinical studies to investigate the effects that this has had on the mental health and wellness of many of us across the world. But bringing this back to what Brand Medicine International, we'll call it BMI moving forward, not Body Mass Index, but Brand Medicine International. You know, when we think about this idea around healthcare marketing, right? So we oftentimes think about mail campaigns and clicks and, you know, open rates and, you know, drip campaigns and all these sorts of things. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what BMI was prior to this cascade and this confluence of digital revolution in the pharma space, and then what it looks like after COVID. Has it accelerated your business? Has it changed the business model?
The wonderful thing about everything being put a stop to with regards to budgets were just cut across the board from clients because they were pulling their sales reps out of the field. All of the conferences were cancelled. So there was suddenly no budget to do the sales aids, to create those panels, to send the emails that were inviting. And then as well, Medicines Australia, which is the body here that represents the pharmaceutical industry, were contacted, I believe, by the AMA, which is the body that represents the GPs, because what happened is everyone pivoted from the in-field sales force to sending lots of emails to the doctors. And there was a call to pharma to please stop sending emails, just stop it. So even that stopped as well in terms of workload. So in grinding to a halt, actually it allowed me to really reflect on the things that I think are representing a blind spot in the digital communication landscape. And that is the patient information experience. So how patients interact with search engines right from when they very first experience a symptom to when they get a diagnosis, to when they are prescribed a treatment, to when they experience adverse events, to when their disease progresses, and that whole continuum. And when I started really looking at that, it just blew my mind because I realized that as an industry, we are failing patients. We are absolutely failing them because we haven't sort of addressed this at all. And to me as well, in a way, this is really exciting because it means there's still more work to be done. You know, in a way, the way that we used to promote, certainly in Australia as well, because we are not allowed to put prescription medications online in terms of direct-to-consumer advertising. But I'm right now pushing for patient-responsive content. And I'm calling it that because if we are not present, what happens is we're creating a vacuum where misinformation can thrive. So I'm actually going upstream and working with the regulators and trying to influence legislation to change it to enable that presence online for the patients who we cannot ignore, that they're looking for information. And if they have a low health literacy, they'll find information that they will think is quality and satisfying their informational quest, when in fact it's misleading to them. So, so for me, this break and transition through COVID allowed me the opportunity to think and to develop these ideas. And actually just this week, I published an article on search listening optimization is the new search engine optimization, because I realized through this work that search engine optimization is really just about the platform, whereas search listening optimization is putting the patient at the heart of how we design and calibrate our content to turn up. And while some people might think that search engine marketing, where you do listen to the long form questions and calibrate your content with that a little bit, they might think that that's doing the job. But what I see when I do a search listening report and I follow through not just the questions people are asking in the real world, but the results that they're getting, I can see that whatever we were doing before, it wasn't working. So it needs to be taken up the next level. So to me, search engine optimization is like your cost of entry, and search listening optimization is what we really need to be doing if we want to be turning up for patients where and when they need us to.
So really great points, Julian. And I think this is a really brilliant jumping off point to dig in a little deeper. So it sounds to me like search engine optimization is really leveraging, if you will, the cogs behind the machine. There's all sorts of algorithms and computer, this, that, and the other thing that a lot of us can't figure out. It's like trying to understand all the tubes and wires behind, old television sets, and something just works somehow. So there's this, algorithmic, piece behind all of it that determines who's going to see what and all those other things. And we can have a conversation about that. But what you're saying is, in amidst that quagmire, there is a conversation that's happening. And it's just sort of built on top of it. And so what you're suggesting is the new SEO is SLO, or search listening optimization. So tell us about what you're listening to, and what tools is BMI, Brand Medicine International, using to be able to listen to these patient conversations?
Yeah, like I literally get goosebumps when I do my work. I just find it so absolutely fascinating. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I discover. I've done quite a bit of work in the prostate cancer area. And so for my book that I'm in the middle of writing, which is Patient Insights in the Digital Age, we're kind of looking at the symptoms and that experience of the way people search for information when they have symptoms of this disease. Now, this, like many other diseases, is really serious. And if it's treated earlier, you have a much better hope of quality of life and, extending those years of life as well. And so it's critically important that we interact with and intercept those people when they're undertaking those early searches, and encouraging them to go and see their doctor. So when someone is searching around that, if you look at the list of symptoms, the kind of things it might say is blood in semen and things like that. If you can listen for that question, no one's actually asking the question in that way. So if we were just doing keyword optimization, which is SEO, to make sure that patient education and information was turning up in response to that query or that question, you would find that you're not connecting. What I found at that time when I did that search listening exercise was that people were asking, can an erection cause bleeding? Because that's the patient in their body experiencing that symptom. And so that's how they're asking the question. And so that to me is a good example of the shift between search engine optimization and search listening optimization. Basically, it allows us to sit beside the patient while they're undertaking that private consultation with Dr. Google. And because we work in healthcare, it's also really important to remember that many of the questions that people have about their health can be extremely private. And so they might not be comfortable to even ask their GP until it's dire. And the other thing about COVID as well is that people, and I've seen 150 to 200% increase in the queries around certain topics through COVID, because they don't want to go to the GP for a niggling symptom, because they're more worried about catching the coronavirus by going to see a healthcare professional. So there's that as well. But the wonderful thing about the search listening is that you are aggregating all of the queries that are being put into search engines. And so there's about 70,000 health-related search queries that have been put into Google alone every minute. It's 1 billion a day. So it's such an incredible data set that I just think we haven't tapped into it as pharma, and we are not leveraging it with at all, really. And now, given that I've worked for over 20 years on all different kinds of brands, whether at the global level, at the national level, and also in launch stage and other stages of the life cycle where they might be launching a new indication or things like that, is that I wouldn't go into strategic planning without a search listening report and looking at that search experience through the lens of a patient in my category. And the reason why I think it's so vital is that a survey I did last December identified that over 80% of people, when they're prescribed a therapy, they will go online and they will look up that medication by name. And if we're not there answering their questions, and it's more than just a keyword alignment, if we're not there answering their real world questions, then we're missing an opportunity. And it can actually be a big driver of what's called primary non-adherence. So for example, my husband, as I mentioned, he's a pharmacist and he does have really bad back pain. And he was prescribed Lyrica for nerve pain. And Lyrica is a well-established product. It's a great treatment for this condition. And it's one of the flagship products for the Pfizer portfolio. And he went online when he got that prescription. He had the box in his hand. He went online and he looked up Lyrica. And this is where the power of storytelling can eclipse, meta-analysis of clinical data, is that the blog stories of people's experience on the product deterred him to such a degree that the box still sits closed in his bathroom cabinet. He never opened it. He's like, I'll put up with the pain. And he said, I will never take that product. And it's because he saw these stories that were so viscerally demotivating to him. But that person is not a healthcare professional. They might have had comorbidities they hadn't disclosed. There's all kinds of other things going on behind that story that we don't know, but the impact to the patient is quite significant. So those are two of the things, the way people search around symptoms, the way people search around a product. And I'll give you one final example if I've got time. One of the other things I do is I map search listening to the stages of grief. And this is because when people are dealing with a really serious diagnosis, they react and transition through that process, just like the stages of grief. And I've actually added in another stage to the normal stages, which is fear, because people also have a stage where they're fearful of, will I still be able to have children with my cervical cancer diagnosis? Will I still be able to work with my multiple sclerosis? Those are the kind of questions that they ask. One of the really important stages is acceptance. And one of the things that I love about search listening is if you think about the way that you enter in questions into a search engine, we naturally interact with it like a conversation. And so when people get to the acceptance stage of grief around a diagnosis, they start talking to it like my diabetes or my high blood pressure. And one of the things that I discover when I start listening to queries around, for example, my cancer, is that because we're not listening as an industry to the real world questions that patients are asking in their own words, the things that are turning up in response to my cancer is this blog story. And it's called My Cancer Story Rocks. And it comes up as an auto-suggest. And Google actually, what people do, about 23% of people will click on the auto-suggest. And if you think about the mindset of someone who has cancer, they're going to see a positive story and they're going to gravitate towards it. And they're going to be like, oh, wow, this person's cancer story rocks. I really want to know about that. And so they go there. And these are the rabbit holes that people are going down online that I think industry ignores it at its peril. Because this particular one, this man, it blows my mind. He's talking about a dog medication and he's got links to buy it on Amazon on his blog. And he talks about the fact that it's so popular that if it's run out, you can use this generic. And you see in the comments, people saying, well, if a 40-kilogram dog needs 2 tablets, how many tablets do I need? And do you think patients are running back to their doctors and disclosing that they're starting taking this dog medication to cure their cancer because some guy on a blog is telling them that it's the bee's knees? So this is the kind of stuff that makes me think when people say, oh, we're already doing search engine marketing. I'm like, you're not. It's not working.
So I'm going to just interrupt you here for a sec, Julie. So there's a few things that we need to discuss here. So you're talking about wisdom of the crowds and the fact that part of the search listening optimization is there's certain beliefs or premises that we are agreeing to as being, a part of the logistics of it. And one of them is that we have to put aside any disbelief that anything that's written down is not the truth. And that if people are blogging, that it's their real authentic version of it, and it's not being skewed by a pharmaceutical company or a competitor or a series of people who are trying to get a point across. The reason for my question is we almost have to sort of believe that, as we think about what is the ultimate point of truth, and is there such a thing? I think if there's anything that we've learned recently from the COVID-19 pandemic and the entire social and political unrest that has transpired, is that people can look at the exact same thing. Like somebody could look at that box of medication that your husband was looking at. They could both be looking at it, and two people can see something completely different. It's the same kind of neutral version of the truth, but people's renderings or their interpretations, or what I like to call heuristics, are completely different. So in this world of cancel culture, of inauthenticity, of, question, everybody's an expert and not at the same time, and that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of versions of the truth. Is there validity in believing what is on the internet through social listening optimization?
Yeah, and it's search listening optimization. Social listening and search listening are distinct and different in that sense. So I see what you're saying. What I would refer back to in terms of identifying truth, and this is probably my background as a scientist playing into it here, is what's the evidence-based approach? And that is a numbers game. And that is where you have the clinical data set that's based on rigorous, comparable data that's been overseen by healthcare professionals in in a controlled environment. It's so that you can actually measure safety and efficacy of something. And that's what alarms me about the kind of the blog stories based on an N of 1. And then people are going to be taking something that's not even indicated for humans. I mean, it's bad enough if someone starts taking something that's not indicated in a particular disease state, because they're kind of, they're going off piste and they're just rogue and they're taking big risks with their health.
I'd also like to encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. If you're interested in having these kinds of stakeholder conversations with your internal folks, globally or locally, determining how you're going to manage strategy, your plans, your races, your conversations, how you're going to be leading, and do this asynchronously and synchronously over time. This is actually what we do at the Impetus Insight platform. So we'd love to hear from you. Please like and subscribe so that you can hear other new innovations from us on this channel. We want to thank all of you for attending today, and I just want to wish everybody a wonderful day ahead.